Hi everyone, Sarah here, back with another video. So today we're going to be talking about a particular genre, or two particular genres. As you can probably tell from the title of the video, what we're going to be discussing is something that I think a lot of people tend to get confused about, and it's not a surprise really, but I think it's something that a lot of people would benefit from understanding a little bit more, and that is whether something is a romance or erotica. So we're going to discuss just the general sort of genre conventions of each genre, both romance and erotica, because they are different genres, okay? And also sort of misconceptions about how they overlap. But yeah, so let's get started. So let's start with romance. What is a romance? I think most people, if you ask them, would say that a romance is a love story. And that's not wrong, but it doesn't quite cover what a modern romance is in the genre fiction world anyway. So if we go back and we think about where the romance genre came from, you'll find that books that were referred to as a romance, they might have involved love stories or romantic stories, but they weren't the same as what we would consider now. So for example, a common example would be the Arthurian legends, like for example, The Death of Arthur, The Mort d'Arthur, by Thomas Malroy. So that would be considered a romance. And that's a romance in the same way that there's the genre of romantic poetry or romantic era artworks. It's a genre of sort of art and fiction which does focus around love stories, but also heavily makes use of sort of medieval ideas of chivalry, and that sort of romance, as in something is a romantic idea, not necessarily about two people falling in love. But obviously that's different to what the modern idea of a genre of romance in the genre literature is. So modern romance is generally going to be a story about two or more people, because, you know, there's lots of polyamory and sort of like waichus and all of those sort of subgenres within the romance. But usually, you know, just to make it easy, we're going to say it's between two people, the protagonists, and it is the story of their emotional journey together, often also their sort of inner journey, and it will focus on their relationship and how their relationship grows and develops, and will almost always end on a happily ever after. You know, the guy gets the girl gets the guy, they walk off into the sunset happily ever after. So the goal of a modern romance book is always going to be the culmination and success of the romantic relationship between the protagonists. These books, they can have lots of sex in them. They can have absolutely no sex in them. That doesn't matter. Obviously, there are lots of subgenres as well, you know, niches within the bigger umbrella of romance. But in general, it's going to end with a happily ever after, and it's going to have no cheating in it. That's a big sort of genre convention for romance in general, is that the protagonists cannot cheat on each other. There are exceptions to this, like in dark romance and all of those sort of genres, where these sort of happily ever after or no cheating or, you know, no abuse to between the main characters, those sort of tropes can have a lot more leeway. But in general, a romance is about the romantic journey of the relationship between two protagonists or more protagonists that culminates in a happily ever after where they end up together. So next, what about erotica? A lot of people just sort of assume that erotica just means it's a romance with lots and lots of sex in it, but that's not quite right. So just as a romance is going to be a story that focuses on the romantic journey between two or more characters and their romantic relationship, an erotica is also going to be focused on the relationship between two or more characters. But it's not going to just be this emotional, often inner journey of the characters. It is going to be more of an external journey between the characters based around their sexuality, their sexual exploits. The goal of an erotica is for the characters to reach climax, basically, not metaphorically. An erotica focuses on the sexual exploits of one or more characters, and the whole point of the story is for the characters to get off, and by proxy, the reader. And so erotica can have a story to it, the same way that porn can sort of have a story to it, but it's not the point. It's just there to keep things afloat, basically to move things along. The whole point of an erotica is to just have these sexual exploits. So an erotica doesn't necessarily have to have a happily ever after. It can have as much cheating as you want if that's the niche it's in. It doesn't have the same conventions as the average romance novel would. So that's basically what each one is. I'm sure you can see how they do differ just from that. So while they both technically focus on romantic relationships, romance will focus more on the inner journey. It will be about the development of a romantic relationship between the characters that will culminate in them getting together in the end. It can have lots of sex, it can have no sex, it can be happy and sad, but in the end, it should end with the characters together with their happily ever after. And erotica also focuses on romance in the way that it's a sexual story, but the goal of the story is to just reach the non-metaphorical climax. Whether there's a happy ending or not, it doesn't matter. So if you're not sure about whether the book you're writing is a romance or an erotica, because I've seen lots of people ask things like, I'm writing a romance, but there's lots of sex in it. Does that make it erotica? No, it doesn't. Don't worry. If you're writing a romance and there's lots of sex in it, that just makes it an explicit romance. You need to think instead about what the goal of the story is, whether it's for these characters to overcome their inner conflict and get together in the end, or whether it's just to get them off. And another good way to sort of dissect whether what you're writing will fall towards romance or erotica is to think about your story and what you've written, if you've written it already, and think about what would happen. For example, if you think it's a romance, what would happen to the story if you removed all of the parts and the story that pertained to the character's relationship? So if you've got a romance, that is integral. That is the whole point of the book, right? But if you took all of that out and the book fell apart, then it's probably a romance. If, for example, it's a spicy romance, you've got lots of sex in it, so you're not sure if it's a romance or erotica. If you removed every single explicit scene and it didn't really have much of an effect on the overall romantic plotline, the overall sort of flow of the development of the characters' relationships, then it's definitely not erotica, because an erotica is all about the sex. If you're writing it and you take out all of the explicit scenes and suddenly the entire story falls apart, suddenly there's no chemistry, the characters don't work together, the whole thing just starts to fall to pieces, then you're probably falling more along the lines of an erotica. Because for an erotica, obviously, the sex is integral. The same way for a romance, the development of the romantic relationship is integral. So those are pretty simple ways to sort of think about your own writing and whether it really is a romance you're writing. Another sort of thing to think about when you're writing a romance, this is just a little bit off topic from erotica and romance, but it's still good to think about, is the same way that when you're thinking about a romance and if you took the romantic parts out, does it still stand up on its own? If, for example, you're writing a thriller, a romance thriller, you know, some sort of crime thriller, but with a romance in it, how do you know you're writing a romantic thriller versus a romance with thriller elements? So you just do the same sort of check. You think about what would happen if you took out all of the romantic parts, the relationship development parts between the characters. And if then the story still stands up on its own, you know, you can still sort of vibe with the novel or the story, then it's likely that you're not writing a romance, but rather a romantic thriller or whatever this genre is. Because in a romance, the relationship is everything. But obviously, if you're writing something else with a romantic subplot, then you can take the romance out and it should be able to stand on its own. So yeah, that's it. Just a really, really quick, very short rundown on the difference between a romance and erotica, because they aren't the same thing. You don't have to have lots of sex in a romance if that's what you're writing, but obviously erotica can also have romantic parts in it, you know. There's lots of different subgenres within each category. So your best bet is always just going to be read within your genre that you're trying to write. You know, it's always important to read as a writer. You know, you're not going to improve much if you don't actually read, especially within genre fiction, because most genres will have very specific conventions and tropes that a lot of readers are expecting. You don't have to have all of them, obviously, but like, for example, in romance, if you are writing a romance but you don't realize that cheating is a big no-no, and you end up putting in a scene where one of the protagonists cheats, well, you've just alienated the vast majority of your audience. So, when in doubt, read within your genre and, you know, just keep trying. Remember that romance doesn't have to have lots of sex in it, and even if there is lots of sex in it, that doesn't make it erotica, no matter what some people will tell you. But anyway, that's it for today. Keep the fingers on the keyboard, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye.